It is Sunday, December 3rd, and this is The National. The Prime Minister is in China to talk trade, but the plight of Canadians detained in that country looms large.
A Good Samaritan shot and killed in Hamilton. White police say he was just trying to do the right thing.
But we begin in Washington and questions about a presidential tweet with potentially serious legal implications. It seems to suggest that Donald Trump may have obstructed justice. And adding to the mystery, who actually wrote it? Here's the CBC's Paul Hunter.
Oh, wait, what's that?
Donald J. Trump.
In a presidency that's become near continual fodder for late-night comedians, last night a skit depicting Donald Trump and a kind of Christmas ghost, straight out of Charles Dickens. Almost.
So who are you, Jacob Marley? You've got a lot of chains on.
No, I'm Michael Flynn, the ghost of Witness Flipped.
You feel you betrayed your country!
But for countless Americans, it's actually not so funny. Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor, pleading guilty to lying to the FBI over official contact with Russia before Trump was sworn in as president. Trump critics today underlined it sets up a high-stakes either-or.
One, you could say he pled to a fairly minor offense, and that's the end of it, and it's not a big deal. The other, you could say he pled to a fairly minor offense, and that means he has a lot to deliver to the prosecutors.
But as investigators dig in, now with the apparent cooperation of Flynn, a surprise tweet from Trump saying he fired Flynn in February in part because Flynn lied to the FBI, contrary to Trump's earlier explanation. If true, it puts another Trump firing, that of FBI Director James Comey, back in the spotlight. If Trump knew Flynn had lied to the FBI, and then, as Comey has testified, Trump fired Comey for refusing Trump's request to ease up on Flynn.
I think what we're beginning to see is the putting together of a case of obstruction of justice.
Now enter Trump's lawyer, the highly regarded John Dowd, who this weekend said it was he, not Trump, who wrote that potentially incriminating Trump tweet. Even as Trump's Twitter feed today grew longer. I never asked Comey to stop investigating Flynn. Fake news. Another Comey lie. Another tweet adding the FBI is dishonest and its reputation is in tatters. Even Republicans are now advising Trump.
You tweet and comment regarding ongoing criminal investigations at your own peril. I'd be careful if I were you, Mr. President. I'd watch this.
And tonight in James, Comey struck back via Twitter. Quoting himself from this past summer, Comey tweets, "I want the American people to know this truth. The FBI is honest, the FBI is strong, and the FBI is and always will be independent."
And Paul, tonight the president of the FBI Agents Association echoing that in a statement, saying in part FBI agents are dedicated to their mission, suggesting otherwise is simply false. Well, let's go back to something you talked about just a moment ago. What are we to make of Trump's lawyer, John Dowd, saying that he is indeed the one who tweeted on behalf of the president?
Yeah, look, Dowd isn't a rookie at this stuff. It's fair to say that it would be out of character for him to be so sloppy in crafting a tweet such as that one. Not to mention, is it plausible that Trump would allow him to tweet out stuff on Trump's own account without Trump even seeing it, let alone approving it? And one more thing to consider. Remember way back in June when Trump's tweets were in the news for other reasons, as they often are, and reporters here were seeking guidance from the White House on how much weight to give them? Trump's then press secretary, Sean Spicer, put it this way. Trump's tweets are, quote, official statements from the President of the United States. Full stop.
All right, Paul, thank you. Let's tell you a little bit more about that lawyer taking responsibility for the Flynn tweet, Paul describing him as not a rookie. Well, John Dowd, well known in Washington circles, the 76-year-old, a former attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice and an expert in the field of white-collar crime. Among his past clients, the commissioner of baseball, when the league banned Pete Rose back in 1989 for betting on games. Dowd joined the Trump administration in June as a personal legal advisor to the president. And Adrian, this has been a big story all weekend. It'll be interesting to see how it plays tomorrow morning.
It's already tomorrow morning, incidentally, in Beijing. Lots of scrutiny there, too, but not for Donald Trump, for Canada's Prime Minister, because This is where Justin Trudeau is kicking off his latest international trip. He is there to chat with Chinese leaders about trade, tourism, and education. Both sides will be carefully courting each other while keeping their own interests squarely on the table. The CBC's Katie Simpson tells us what Canadians can expect from the visit and what Trudeau can expect from China.
The Prime Minister is about to experience a Chinese charm offensive. China really wants free trade with Canada, and this visit is likely going to be the start of a very long process to get there. Justin Trudeau arrived in Beijing Sunday night local time, ahead of 4 days of meetings with China's top political and business leaders. The anticipated highlight of the trip, an expected announcement that both countries will agree to launch free trade talks. China has a lot to gain by engaging with Canada. It wants Canadian agricultural products, advances in clean technology, and its natural resources. Plus, Canada is a G7 nation with a positive international reputation. The potential benefits for Canada are significant but far more complicated. Growth in China is something the Liberal government says it can no longer ignore. China's middle class is made up of some 600 million people eager to spend money, invest, and travel. The Liberals are also under pressure to find new business opportunities given the instability at NAFTA talks. Donald Trump's threats to tear up that deal have put pressure on Canada to diversify. Still, any actual deal with China would take years to negotiate. The Liberals will also have to navigate blowback at home. China's human rights record is a problem, and so is its history of ignoring the rules of trade to get what it wants. The Liberals hope to mitigate those concerns by incorporating progressive elements into negotiations. If Canada is willing to agree to anything, there must be provisions addressing labor standards, gender equality, and the environment. But that may not be enough to satisfy critics who will be watching Trudeau's every move closely. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Beijing.
So you heard Katie mention China's human rights record. She asked the international trade minister about one Canadian case in particular, what some are calling a cautionary tale about doing business in China. BC's John Chang and Allison Liu are winery owners who were detained by Chinese officials in early 2016, accused of smuggling.
I have raised that issue personally with the Minister of Commerce in China when we last met. I will do so again on Monday when I'm going to meet him. So for us, whatever consular cases we have, you can rest assured that this is top of our list because there's nothing more important for us to stand for Canadians which need our assistance abroad.
Since they were arrested, Allison Liu has been released from custody, but she cannot leave Shanghai. Her husband, John Chang, is still in jail, and their daughter says his health needs urgent attention. Briar Stewart has more.
In this promotional video, John Chang shows off some of the wine he produced in Richmond, BC. He's originally from Taiwan and has established deep connections both in Canada and abroad. During the 2010 Olympics, one of the 3 wineries he owns with his wife was transformed into China House and hosted athletes and delegates. The winery has also served as a backdrop for political announcements.
Thank you to John Chang and Allison Liu, who are the co-winers of this beautiful Lulu Island winery, for hosting us.
Chang was invited along on a trade trip to China in 2014 with then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And it was that country that was Chang's primary market. He went on to win an award for his business accomplishments. An online article says his product accounts for nearly 20% of all Canadian wine shipped to China. In March 2016, Chang and his wife, Allison Liu, were arrested while on a business trip.
They were in China traveling to visit suppliers and vendors, and out of the blue, they were just arrested.
Chinese authorities accused them of smuggling, claiming they were deliberately undervaluing their wine. Chang has been in custody since then. His family says his health is deteriorating. He has tumors on his liver, and he has lost nearly 20 kilograms. Liu was released in January, but is barred from leaving China. Both deny any wrongdoing.
And my mom is worried sick every day, and I am as well. And we're both doing the best we can, what she can do in Asia and what I can do in Canada, to get my parents out and home.
Last week, Amy Chang met with politicians, and she wants her parents' case to take priority over any talk of trade.
I would like a resolution of my parents' case. I would really hope that he can get my parents home.
The couple went on trial in May, and while there hasn't been a verdict yet, the conviction rate in China is more than 99%, which is why their daughter hopes the government can bring them back to BC, and soon. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
There are other Canadians detained in China despite diplomatic efforts that in some cases go back years.
Well, look, these type of diplomatic matters, as you know, are sometimes like water on granite. You have to be persistent.
Hussein Jalil has been held since 2006 over his activism for China's minority Uyghur Muslims. He has never even met the youngest of his 4 children, who was born in Canada after his arrest. Another Canadian, Sun Jian, was arrested in February for observing the forbidden Falun Gong religion. Reportedly, treatment has been rough at times. Solitary confinement, darkened rooms, insufficient food. But there is hope. You may remember Kevin Garrett, a BC man whom China accused of spying and held for 2 years. He was released last year, just over a week after Prime Minister Trudeau returned from his first official visit to China. Now, at the time, Ian, the government said it didn't actually make any concessions to secure Garrett's release, but you have to know that now the expectations are huge. All right, let's move on to a story much closer to home. Police in Hamilton investigating after a selfless act turned deadly last night.
He was trying to help. As far as I'm concerned, he was trying to do something heroic. This led to him losing his life, which is just a tragedy. A murder is always a terrible thing, but when the victim is a good Samaritan, perhaps even more so. Lorenda Redekop has our story.
Yusuf Al Haznawi was a first-year university student and dreamed of becoming a doctor one day. This photo taken shortly before he was killed. It happened last night when he was standing up for someone else. Police say Al Haznawi came across 2 young men confronting an older man and tried to help, but he was shot and died an hour later in hospital.
He was trying to be a good Samaritan. He was trying to help.
Police spent the day canvassing the neighborhood, looking for the 2 suspects and any clues.
Just a pop, that was all. I've never heard a gunshot before, so to me it was just like, pop.
Several neighbors went outside to see what happened.
I did see a young man on the sidewalk. He was alive at that point. He was alive and moving. He looked in distress, definitely in distress, but there was no apparent evidence of like blood or anything like that. I didn't see anything like that.
Police say the 19-year-old had just left this Islamic center with his younger brother. They walked a short distance in this direction, and then they came across a man being accosted by 2 others. When Al Haznawi tried to intervene, the 2 suspects turned their attention onto him. His younger brother witnessed it all. He's just 13 years old. But people at the scene are raising troubling questions about how emergency officials treated Al Haznawi.
The one officer did say to him, come on, buddy, let's get in the car, and then asked other people that were around, you know, does he always act this way?
They were telling the poor kid, oh, you're fine, you're a good actor. And
Talib al-Jalili knew Al Haznawi.
And they kept on saying to the people around him, tell him to stop acting. Why would he act? Why would we call the ambulance?
Police say they have no information about the handling of the emergency, but would like to hear from witnesses. The paramedic service says it would investigate any complaints. Meanwhile, at the Islamic Center, they're preparing for Al Haznawi's funeral. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Hamilton.
A Canadian man has been killed while on vacation in Trinidad, and police are treating this as a homicide. Vishnu Nareen of Ontario was in Trinidad, his homeland, visiting family. Local media reports say his body was found near the city of San Fernando, about 45 kilometers south of the capital, Port of Spain, and just a day before he was supposed to return to Canada. Police telling a newspaper they believe he was robbed. A funeral was held in Abbotsford, BC this weekend for a young Syrian refugee. 9-year-old Hala Al-Barhoum died Friday morning when she was hit by a city bus at a crosswalk near her school. There was no crossing guard on duty at the time. The girl and her family had only been in Canada for about a year.
They thought they were safe from all the bombs and the war in Syria. When they finally found refuge in safety in Canada, it was a bus accident that took away their loved one.
Police, transit authorities, and school board are investigating. A GoFundMe campaign has been set up to help the family pay funeral costs.
Still ahead on The National, a special report from Nala Ayed, why the fight for power within Lebanon has consequences that reach far beyond the country's borders.
We take you underneath Montreal, our team diving into a newly discovered system of caves.
Plus, the meaning of the moment. Trailblazing editor Tina Brown on Me Too.
I think that all revolutions come with risk, and I think we are seeing a revolution. And revolutions get bloody, and revolutions often get off the rails. So you're going to see corollary damage. You're going to see some decent men who are falsely accused.
Hi, I'm Grant Lawrence from CBC Music with a song that you need to hear this week. It's been about 15 years now since Canadian independent music became a red-hot export. Leading the way, bands like Arcade Fire, Broken Social Scene, and Metric, a four-piece Toronto group fronted by enigmatic lead singer Emily Haines.
Skip town, slow down, push it to the East Coast. Step down, turn around, push it to the West. Need less, use less, we're asking for too much, I guess. 'Cause all we get is dead disco, dead funk, dead rock and roll. Remodel everything, spend time, la 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 la.
That's Metric with their song Dead Disco from back in 2003, and that's a great record. After a few years of international success with Metric, Emily Haines released her first solo album under the name Emily Haines and the Soft Skeleton. The music was much more subdued and piano-based than Metric.
Hard to hold, cold to touch, fall to pieces, treat the rush and hindsight of prime time talk. All your pain will end here.
That is Emily Haines from her first solo record back in 2006 with a song called Dr. Blind. And I'm pretty sure that video was filmed at Zeller's, R.I.P. Well, it's been a full 11 years later, and Emily Haines has finally once again taken time off from singing lead in Metric to create another solo album. This one is called Choir of the Mind. And if you're into Emily Haines' softer side, it's worth the wait. Check out this song called Fatal Gift.
Why do we stay paying for a living wage? I know it's a deceptive deal. We accept the fatal gift. They hover over where we live.
That is Toronto singer Emily Haines with Fatal Gift from her new solo album, Choir of the Mind.
These are survivors of a Saudi-led coalition airstrike in Yemen. At least a dozen people are reported dead. The strike hit in an area that is held by the Houthi movement. Saudi Arabia says the Houthis get their weapons from Iran and its Lebanese ally, Hezbollah. Hezbollah has denied those accusations, but it is hard to deny the group is shaping events in the Middle East. It helped to save the Assad government from defeat in Syria. Its growing influence prompting the dramatic resignation last month of Lebanon's prime minister. In the deadly regional knife fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Hezbollah is Iran's knife. And as Nala Ayed explains from Lebanon, it has a growing reach.
Southern Lebanon has scars as deep as its memory is long. This is Hezbollah heartland, home to many of its fighters, dead and alive. and once occupied by Israel. Hezbollah's story, scripted in border towns like Bint Jbeil, mostly destroyed in the biggest battle of the conflict with Israel 11 years ago. Now rebuilt with the help of Qatar and Iran, but still wary. We were allowed to visit, but only with escorts. Reviled by the West for a history of violence, here Hezbollah, meaning the Party of God, is revered as the resistance. When the smoke cleared after the war, and despite the costs, supporters insist they had no regrets. We live with the party, and we are always with the party, he says. As long as leader Hassan Nasrallah is at the helm, nothing scares us. He's the one standing in the face of the enemy, whether it's Israel or anyone else, he says. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is as deeply divisive as it is deeply entrenched.
When they started launching their operation, they started from here. Yeah. So this is the line of fire. Yeah.
At a mountaintop museum, Hezbollah tells its own story, that it exists to counter Israel.
The tunnel now, we see everything as it was before.
Worked for years to build that reputation, and the museum, in the very base from where its fighters launched their attacks.
Hezbollah doesn't need to make a museum to let people know more about them. Hezbollah is in government, Lebanese government. He's in our life, everywhere.
Including in Beirut's southern suburbs. But more recently, the Iran-backed Shia Muslim Hezbollah has evolved in purpose. Hezbollah has gone from being mostly an anti-Israel fighting force to one that's playing a bigger role in the region. And that has made it a focal point in the region's latest crisis. Hezbollah has pushed beyond Lebanon, fighting with or advising regional forces allied with Iran in Yemen, Iraq, and crucially in Syria. Considered a terrorist organization by much of the West, including Canada, last week Hezbollah earned the same label from Arab states, following Saudi accusations it had a hand in a missile attack from Yemen, which it denies. Either way, Hezbollah has become the new focal point for Iran-Saudi rivalry.
Well, obviously Saudi has made it about Hezbollah, but I think it really is also about Iran. And in targeting Hezbollah, Saudi also hopes to weaken Iran's influence in the region. Lebanon's prime minister, seemingly forced by Saudi Arabia to resign over the attack, calling Hezbollah his coalition partner, a state within a state. He backtracked pending talks that started this week, though still insisting Hezbollah stick to a policy of neutrality. I don't want a political party in my government that interferes in Arab countries against other Arab countries, says Saad Hariri. But given Iran's staunch support for the group, it won't be easy, says this former ambassador to the U.S.
Hezbollah cannot be neutral. I mean, they have army in Syria and Iraq. They have advisors in Yemen, and Iran wants a price for this. These are the cards in their hand. They have to be negotiated.
Here again, Lebanese are divided. Hezbollah's foray into Syria has cost many of its own fighters' lives, some of them buried here in Beirut's southern suburb. But it is a popular fight among supporters, even those who lost loved ones, like Batul Zainuddin, whose close friend Ali died in battle. It's our dignity, our pride, she says, and our honor. It's a march that we have to finish. Hardline Hariri supporters, meanwhile, Sunni Muslims find it hard to trust Hezbollah, its ties to Iran, didn't like its involvement in Syria. Some of its members are also accused of assassinating Hariri's father. And in 2008, it turned its weapons inwards, taking over Beirut. There's concern now its actions may again invite conflict or provoke economic warfare if Gulf countries, which employ tens of thousands of Lebanese, deliver on threats to impose sanctions.
This issue is not resolved. I think failure to dissociate politically will also imply financial and economic dissociation from our most valuable partners.
The reality is that there seems little choice. Certainly, the most militarily powerful group in Lebanon is also one of its most powerful politically. It is Hezbollah's allies in the president's seat and the majority in government, loyally backed by Iran.
But the hostage is the whole sovereign Lebanon and the whole institution of a sovereign state, who are totally now controlled by one party that is holding the arms.
Given Hezbollah's power and previous experience, confrontation isn't an option, says this future party MP.
I'm one of those who believe in dialogue. And I think in Lebanon, we cannot conduct our affairs without dealing with Hezbollah. That would be folly to think, it would be folly to think otherwise.
Hezbollah wouldn't give us official interviews, leaving all the talking to their leader, who said outside missions are winding down anyway. But will they give them up completely?
Hezbollah is not going to withdraw from Syria. That's existential. That's just like telling them, drop your arms, don't fight Israel. But yes, Iraq, Yemen, they can make concessions on these.
Having a seat in the Lebanese government and a majority vote, this is very important for an organization that is qualified terrorist organization by the Americans, by the Arabs, and by the Europeans. This government is offering a legal cover for them. But is it ready to pay the price for this government to stay? This is what we need to know.
Divisive, certainly. Put on notice as a junior partner of Iran, definitely. But Hezbollah in Lebanon is deeply rooted. So compromise is inevitable because the alternative is war. Hezbollah's story here continues. Nala Ayed, CBC News, Bint Jbel, Lebanon.
Hezbollah's influence is prompting fears that opposing groups are radicalizing and arming themselves. In Lebanon, that evokes fears of another civil war. The civil war that ruined the country decades ago gave birth to Hezbollah. The war was raging in 1982 when Hezbollah was formed, as Nala mentioned, to resist an Israeli occupation of Lebanon's south. Some also believe it targeted the U.S. The bombing of the American military barracks in Beirut in 1983 killed 241 servicemen. Hezbollah was later blamed for it, though the perpetrators have never been revealed. Hezbollah has clashed with Israel a number of times, the latest conflict in 2006. Its influence in Lebanon has grown since. Many Western countries, including Canada, designate it as a terrorist organization.
Later on The National, Tina Brown weighs in on high-profile men taken down by sexual misconduct allegations.
You know, it's distressing when a friend, as he is, suddenly find that there's a whole other side of him that you didn't know about. But at the same time, you know, these penalties have to happen.
The legendary magazine editor also has first-hand tales of Harvey Weinstein and Donald Trump.
Plus, what lies beneath a discovery like none other under Montreal.
It's just beautiful. There's 5 meters of water underneath, and it keeps going. We haven't reached the end yet.
And go deeper on the stories of the day, earlier in the day. Subscribe to our newsletter at cbcnews.ca/The National. The National today takes you inside our journalism every afternoon.
forgive me for putting on these sunglasses, but they're actually bifocals and they're the only glasses I have with me. I don't like to see people wearing sunglasses in interviews. This is the only poem I can read. I am the only one who can write it. I didn't kill myself when things went wrong. I didn't turn to drugs or teaching. I tried to sleep, but when I couldn't sleep, I learned to write. I learned to write what might be read on nights like this by one like me.
Through his work, Leonard Cohen has cultivated a public persona just as interesting as his writing, writing that deserves and has a new anthology. While Cohen prefers talking about the present and the future, this book has him looking to his past.
Now, the early stuff was written between the ages of 15 and 20, you know. I think it's been downhill ever since, so I had a real gift then.
In 1956, while still an undergraduate at Montreal's McGill University, he won a national prize for his first book of poetry. His second won him international acclaim.
His blood on my arm is warm as a bird. His heart in my hand is heavy as lead. His eyes through my eyes shine brighter than love. Oh, send out the raven ahead of the dove.
Cohen quickly cultivated the reputation of a chronically depressed poet who was both hip and hypnotic. He dubbed himself the grocer of pain. And while the grocer of pain is still at his post, since 1967, he's been putting his words to music.
We're drinking and we're dancing. The band is really happening. The Johnny Walker wisdom running high. And my very sweet companion, she's an angel of compassion. She's rubbing half the world against her thigh.
At the beginning of his musical career, friends begged him not to sing. Cohen's voice is reminiscent of a truck trying to turn over on a cold Montreal morning. Not pleasant, but a familiar sound, and that sound was honored at the Junos earlier this year with the Best Male Vocalist Award.
You know, it's only in a country like this that I could get the Male Vocalist of the Year.
Last week, Cohen received a Governor General's Performing Arts Award. While he's a bona fide star around the world, musical acceptance here in North America is something new for Cohen.
This is my work. Writing is my work.
I've always been a news junkie, and now that I have news alerts on my phone, it's 24/7.
Do you sleep with your phone?
I do, as a matter of fact. It's next to my bed, let's put it that way. It's never really off. I can't help myself.
That is the unsinkable Tina Brown and her unquenchable curiosity. And that's the stuff that propelled her to the heights of the magazine world, delivering delicious new insights into wealth, celebrity, and politics. She saw what was coming well before anyone else did. That's her magic trick, and she's still at it. Tina Brown has a thing for new ventures and for news. Editor of Tatler magazine at the age of 25. Editor of Vanity Fair at 30.
No one's going to argue me out of a sentence I think is a good one.
Then editor of The New Yorker, then founder of The Daily Beast. Presidents, royalty, celebrities, and scoundrels, she got to know them all. She is responsible for some of the most daring magazine covers of the era, for taking failing magazines and making them soar. The woman to the rescue in the man's world of the 80s. Chronicled with a lot of swearing, plenty of secrets, and a few regrets in her latest book, The Vanity Fair Diaries. Tina Brown's magic was what she calls her observational greed, and that capacity to take the pulse of the moment. Please, have a seat.
Thank you.
Which is what we sat down to talk about a few days ago, right here in the National Studio. So if measuring a moment was one of your great skills, how do you measure this moment?
Well, I'm very much aware of this moment as being a time in the United States of a great deal of unease. Some of it reminds me of that period in the 80s because I constantly write in the diaries about how precarious it all seems. It seems like we're on the lip of a volcano. And I feel that constantly now, that all the way through this last year with Trump, that some horrendous shoe is going to drop, because people are so tense and anxious. And it's partly to do, I think, with digital disruption. You know, our world has changed immeasurably and with enormous speed. So there's a sense of the pace of the digital has outstripped humanity, in a sense, which leaves people with a lot of sense of unease about what's happening that they haven't caught. So there's a constant sense of a missed train. That's really the feeling I get, and I think it makes people uncomfortable.
Speaking of trains, what do you make of this Me Too train?
Well, that's, I think, a watershed thing that has happened. And I mean, not since the 60s have we seen such a volcano of women saying enough is enough, and I will not continue as we have been. It started with the Women's March, which after all was the biggest single-day protest in American history.
Do you draw a line between the Women's March and the Me Too movement?
No, I think it's a natural arc. You know, I think that march in 2017 was a stunned sort of pushback, in a sense, to what had just happened in the election, and a sense of outrage and a sense of regret and grief that women hadn't somehow woken up in time to stop a macro-aggression descending on them in the face of the Trump presidency. Towards the end of the year, you know, it's gone on, the boiling, the kind of fury about that, and it's led to this kind of outrage, as it were, after the sexual harassment, horrendous charges of Harvey Weinstein, and it really just led people to think, women to think, this is just cannot stand. I mean, and we know that it's not just this guy. This guy is a horrendous, egregious pig. But there are so many more guys who are getting off, and we're just not going to have it anymore.
What determines if the Me Too movement endures? I mean, where's the risk for this movement?
I think that all revolutions come with risk, and I think we are seeing a revolution. And revolutions get bloody, and revolutions often get off the rails. So you're going to see corollary damage. You're going to see some decent men who are falsely accused. You're going to see some unfair reprisals. But I think that the larger picture is going to be a healthy one.
You referred to Harvey Weinstein as a pig, and that's not just you looking at him from afar. This is a man you knew quite well.
Yes, I know. I worked with him for 2 years when I left the New Yorker, which is to edit Talk magazine. And yeah, he was a volcanic and abusive and profane individual who, you know, I was most happy to not be working with anymore. So although I didn't see the sexual predations, I, you know, did see an extremely bombastic and unattractive person at work, a big bully. But, you know, what he did, in a sense, has let loose this extraordinary cultural moment. So it's ironic that he, of all people, should have ended up causing a sort of referendum of masculinity. I mean, nobody would have thought that it would be he that would let loose that kind of soul-searching on the part of, you know, very decent men. I mean, let's face it, there are tons of men who are just as appalled by this as women. And many of them asking themselves, how can we make sure that can never happen to a woman again?
And perhaps you thought you were talking to one of those decent men about a month or so ago when you sat down with Charlie Rose to talk about Harvey Weinstein.
What does it change?
I think what we're seeing, frankly, is that women have just decided and pushed back definitively that they will not have to deal with this kind of toxic testosterone anymore.
When you look at that interview in hindsight now, I wonder what that feels like.
Well, it's pretty stunning. It's pretty stunning. And, you know, it's distressing when a friend, as he is, suddenly finds, you know, you suddenly find this whole other side of him that you didn't know about. But at the same time, you know, these penalties have to happen, because without the big penalties, it's going to go on. So unless people look at themselves and think, my God, you know, if I don't stop doing this, this could be me. My whole career, my whole legacy wiped out, which is the most extraordinary thing we're seeing. I mean, the Charlie Rose legacy appears to be in complete jeopardy now, as does Louis C.K. or Kevin Spacey. But at the same time, though the death of talent might be, the fact is that this revolution had to happen.
Fair price to pay?
Probably, yeah.
You talked about soul searching, and it's interesting going through your book again. I only took a few notes of times where people spoke to you in a sexist way, or there were reviews that would never have been written about a man. But there's nothing in there about you being sexually harassed. And you don't have to tell anybody about that, but did this not ever happen to you?
Well, don't forget, I was a boss from the age of 25. So I was always had a certain amount of control over my own life. And I certainly think that sexual harassment is only really completely bona fide in a sense when there's a power change between you. You know, when you are a person who does not have as much power as your harasser. That wasn't the case with me because from a very young age, I was sort of the boss, so I couldn't be harassed in that sense.
Do you wonder, though, if women weren't coming to you with problems about sexual harassment? I mean, do you think back now?
Well, I think about it now, and actually I don't think so in our company because it was a very, very female company. I mean, certainly at Vanity Fair it was mostly female and a lot of gay guys, actually. The New Yorker was a much more male environment. I never heard that from any of the women in the company, but I did promote a lot of women. And I think that one of the answers to that is a lot of women in management. I mean, at the New Yorker, most of the new hires I put into management were women. So I changed the balance in the New Yorker. When I came in, it was a very, very male shop. And in fact, when my first meeting at the New Yorker, I looked around the table and it was all men.
I have to ask you about Donald Trump. I just,
so sorry
I
about
have
that.
to.
He's in the diaries all the time.
He is. You saw this coming. It seems to me from reading that you saw the hold he had or the fascination Americans had with him. How do you explain that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The first time I meet him in the Vanity Fair diaries is at an event shortly after I had extracted in the magazine as a serial extract, The Art of the Deal. And I bought the book because I liked it a lot. I read it over a weekend and I thought, this guy it's total BS, this book, but it's authentic. BS, if you like. It's a real voice. Like it or not, it's a real voice. And I always look for a voice when I'm in editing. Shortly after that, I met him, and it was at a dinner party. Our dinner partners weren't talking to each other, so we were talking across each other, and he was going, you know, oh, I went to the opera last night, 3 hours, no intermission. I said to Ivana, you know, never again, you know, and it was like that. The whole thing was just completely blah out of his mouth, anything that happened. I thought it was great. I thought he was funny. Later on, he gets much less funny, and I start to realize that he's a kind of toxic individual, is the truth. We publish a piece that he really hates, in which the author says Marie Brenner wrote that she had noticed that on his desk he had Hitler's speeches. And he goes ballistic, and in fact, at a benefit then, 6 months later, he passes behind Marie Brenner at the dinner party and he empties white wine down the back of her dress. And that, in a sense, was a little flash, if you like, of the Trump we know today.
If you could, for one more month, get your hands on Vanity Fair, who would be on the cover right now? What would be that most important story?
Well, I was going to say Meghan Markle, but actually they did Meghan Markle to their credit. I'd like to do the 3 generals at the White House. I'd like to do Mattis, I'd like to do McMaster, and Kelly.
Why?
Because it's a bit of a mystery. It's one of the few mysteries in the sense of the Trump administration, which is like, who is in charge? Who is really in control here? And are we lurching along to Trump's impulses? Or is there anybody who can implement a kind of lasting idea and policy in that administration?
Sounds to me like you think they are in charge.
I think they could be. I hope they are. Or perhaps I don't. I've had some really second thoughts about General Kelly recently. I think that maybe he's very Trumpian himself. That's the interesting question about the story. Who are they?
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really interesting interview. It's been 25 years since the first text message. We'll hear from the man who sent it and get a sense of how texting has changed our lives.
I wouldn't quit a job over text. I still wouldn't break up over text if it's been like an actual relationship. A few dates, I think, is decent.
But first, the destructive toddler in all of us lives for these moments. Today, the charges were set. The Pontiac Silverdome ready for implosion. And
Wow, that was loud.
it was loud, but nothing happened. It just sat there mocking onlookers. Host to everything from the Super Bowl to WrestleMania to the Pope. In recent years, the Silverdome had fallen into disuse and disrepair. According to the demolition company, now it's in really bad shape. It could come down at any time.
The new mission, the next one, the third one, a lot of differences for you in what you'll be doing, starting with where you'll be sitting. Totally different view from sitting on the flight deck from where you'd been before.
Absolutely. This is my third flight, but the first flight where I will actually be on the flight deck
as we go up into space. So I'll actually see out the window this time.
Any idea how that will compare to, I guess it was sitting down below, was it before?
That's right.
With no real view of what was going on.
Just staring at the lockers in front of me and sort of trying to experience the whole thing, but through what I was listening to rather than seeing anything. Talking to people who have been on the flight deck for launch, it's a bit of a light show because it depends on what time of the day you launch, and we're launching at night at the moment, so it should be quite spectacular. But I can't spend too much time looking out the window. I've got to do a job here. I'm MS2 on this flight, which is the equivalent of the flight engineer. So I sit between the commander and the pilot, and I back them up. So I'll be focused on that. Maybe out of the corner of my eye, I may see some lights.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. The mission itself, once you're orbiting the Earth, becomes a different one for you. You were more focused on the scientific end of things on the other two missions. This is more of a technical one. And you know, I try to read the press release here from the Canadian Space Agency, good people that they are, and I'm lost. You're going to deploy 2 giant solar panels.
That's right.
2/3 the length of a football field.
That's right.
With a laptop computer.
That's literally what actually happens. Somebody is actually keying in at a laptop, and when they hit the button the last time, it starts the process of deploying. Actually, they deploy one solar array first and then the other one. It takes about 13 minutes for these things that are sort of accordioned into a box to fully deploy. But these are the largest solar arrays ever deployed on Earth or in space.
Now, these, of course, are for the International Space Station. Those 13 minutes, it must be a little more involved than you going, okay, I'll just push enter here and away it goes. I mean, it must be a lot more involved than that.
It is involved in the sense that you're continuously monitoring it, because I mean this is quite an accomplishment to actually deploy a solar array, and there's a lot of potential snag points or problems that can occur. So you don't just first of all, you have to do a whole bunch of entries on your laptop to set up the proper conditions. You have to make sure all the power is going to the right places. You have to make sure that the cameras are in the right place to observe this, because if it stops halfway through, you've got a problem. You've got a serious problem. For example, during this whole process, we put the entire space station into free drift. Free drift means that there's nothing trying to maintain it in a particular attitude, because you don't want thrusters firing while this very delicate process is going on. So there's a lot of work that has to be done before you say, okay, we're go for deploying these, and during the time itself, you're watching it like a hawk.
Give me the pitch on the space station.
I like to describe it as a permanent orbiting laboratory.
This is pretty incredible. This is a major discovery we made. This doesn't happen many times in a lifetime.
2 explorers have discovered a huge cave under Montreal, a previously unknown cavern right beneath the bustling city above. Scientists believe it was formed thousands of years ago and that it has yet to reveal all of its secrets. The CBC's Simon Nakonechny has this look underground.
Spelunking, or caving, can be frustrating and fruitless, like banging your head against a rock. But once in a while, breakthroughs happen, and secret worlds are revealed.
And we started digging in a decomposed layer of limestone that was much softer, and within a day we were able to break about 1 meter long of constriction, and we managed to open a window through which we could see the void beyond.
Luc Leblanc and Daniel Caron are believed to be the first people ever to set foot in this underground vault. It was formed some 15,000 years ago, during the last ice age. A vast, newly found part of a much smaller cave discovered 200 years ago.
And this is pretty incredible because there are 3,000 people visiting this cave every summer. That's been going for over 20 years. And nobody ever imagined there could be this big cave beyond.
It's also unlikely the people living here in St. Leonard imagined what lay below these residential streets, that just 10 meters down is a massive rocky vault, 6 meters high, over 2 football fields long. And it doesn't end there.
Eventually, when we go back into this aquifer, and there we have to use an inflatable canoe We did about 100 meters. The walls are perfectly vertical, much more than here. The ceiling is a perfect slab. It's just beautiful. There's 5 meters of water underneath, and it keeps going. We haven't reached the end yet.
The new discovery isn't open to the public, but the city's working on that. In the meantime, Leblanc and Caron will keep poking around in the dark, hoping for another breakthrough. Simon Nakaneshdi, CBC News, Montreal.
The first in a series of events was held in Nova Scotia's capital today, commemorating the worst maritime disaster in Canadian history.
I fear no foe.
A small crowd gathered in an Anglican cemetery to honor some of the youngest victims of the Halifax explosion. 24 children who were living in a nearby church orphanage. They were among the 2,000 people who died when the city was leveled 100 years ago this week. December 6, 1917, a munitions ship collided with another vessel in Halifax Harbor that triggered the largest human-caused explosion before the atomic bomb. So what was the day like? Well, now CBC News can show you. Take a look.
The First World War still rages, and Halifax is an important hub and far from danger. At least that's what everyone thought.
CBC News has launched a new, exclusive, interactive experience. Go back with Adrian to the day of the Halifax explosion and experience the story for yourself in 360. From the sights to the sounds, be there to see what went wrong. Then learn more about the incredible stories in the aftermath, including the railway conductor who gave his life to save countless others. Check out the 360 experience on desktop, mobile, and headset. cbcnews.ca/Halifax Explosion.
A 200-yard stroll separates the U.S. and Russia at Expo. This is an easy location for that fascinating comparison that thousands make here each day, sometimes waiting an hour in line to do it. The Russians seem determined to show the visitor as much as possible. One official told me, everyone knows what America can do. We have to show what we can do. And it's all here, from atomic icebreakers to power stations. There's a plush restaurant, too. Caviar, vodka, borscht, smoked salmon, and just about every day, a stage show. This one, an Estonian group showing that music knows no boundaries. The most impressive part of the American approach is the pavilion building itself. Inside, secure in their industrial achievements and efficiency, the Americans seem to say, you know what we can do. This is just for fun. So there's cowboys, Indians, rag dolls, movie stars, Elvis Presley's guitar, Debbie Reynolds' bed, vinyl-skirted hostesses, and the longest escalator in the world. The one really serious note is an impressive display of space achievements. It's a fresh, light-hearted approach, with a mini-rail running zanily through the middle, but it leaves some visitors feeling vaguely unfulfilled. The Russian pavilion, by comparison, is impressive, but some complain ponderous and overbearing. Whatever their reaction, most people feel they just have to see both. Terry Hargreaves, CBC News at Expo 67.
Welcome to Expo 67, to man and his world. This is the Canadian Pavilion. Canada is a complex country, diverse in heritage, and the pavilion is a reflection of this diversity. Doesn't tell the whole story of what we are.
Some stories we're watching for in the National this week. A decision by the International Olympic Committee is looming large over Pyeongchang. On Tuesday, the IOC will decide if Russia should be banned from competing at this Winter Olympics in South Korea as punishment for state-sponsored doping at the 2014 Olympics in Sochi. About 24 Russian athletes have already been barred from any future Olympic competition. And the U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to make a controversial decision this week, one that has the potential to destabilize the entire Middle East. It's about moving the U.S. Embassy from its current home in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That essentially would be a recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and a momentous break with decades of U.S. policy. Palestinians also claim Jerusalem as their capital, and some say moving the embassy would amount to a declaration of war. Today, Trump's son-in-law and senior Mideast peace advisor said the president's choice has yet to be made.
He's still looking at a lot of different facts, and that when he makes his decision, he'll be the one to want to tell you, not me. So he'll make sure he does that at the right time.
And Trump's decision is expected on Wednesday. Also on Wednesday, Time magazine announces its Person of the Year, the man, woman, or people who've had the most influence on the news this year. Donald Trump took the title last year, but this year, according to the magazine's online poll, the frontrunners are Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the Me Too movement, former NFL player and knee-taker Colin Kaepernick, Robert Mueller, the man investigating Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, and not far from the top of the list, Canada's own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
Merry Christmas. Not an early holiday greeting, but words with special significance 25 years ago today. That phrase, the first ever text message, and it's had an impact on so much of what we now do. This was the phone that received that first text in 1992. Neil Papworth sent it. He now lives in Montreal. And tonight he texted us to say that he feels the legacy of texting is quick and direct communication right from your pocket. Email existed 25 years ago, but from your PC, not from your phone. Today, it's estimated every second of each day, 300,000 texts are sent around the world. And while there's no statistic on how important these messages are, people sometimes seem willing to risk their lives to read them. And the texts sure have changed our lives.
Do you remember like calling a girl's house in high school and being like, oh my gosh, hope her dad doesn't pick up?
Exactly.
But now you just text
Not
people,
an
so
issue
yeah,
anymore.
totally not, completely different. Or just showing up to people's houses and just knocking on the door and seeing if they're there.
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
completely different world now.
We just always contact each other by text.
Yeah.
Where are you? Or
No, a phone call is too much effort. You know, you have to like talk. You know, you can just write one message and you can ignore a message as well.
It's made things easier to communicate with people, but it's taken away that personality, that personal touch.
It's made the world even smaller. I can text anyone I want at any time. My brother lives in Dubai. I can text him at any point and just have like an actual conversation with him.
Nobody texts me. Nobody ever texts me. It's actually quite sad. They all text their mother. I think they love her more.
I can relate to that. I think my wife and I have that same relationship with our sons.
Well, firstly, that's only partially true that nobody texts you because, I mean, unfortunately, we end up texting each other all the time during the show, which we're probably not supposed to do.
Actually, yeah.
I know, Rosie's doing it tonight. But a little tiny detail, the man who invented it said he didn't actually patent it, which makes me feel sad for him.
You know, you always try to inject facts into these conversations.
I'll stop.
All right, that is the National for December 3rd. Good night.